What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over swapping weapons. We will be going over how to swap a weapon using a button press, being able to choose what weapons a player can swap between, so this will work for if you only have two weapons, or if it's more like Doom where you can have like a weapon wheel. We're not going to be doing a weapon wheel like that today, but what I mean is where you can hold like basically an unlimited number of weapons. Your limit is how many the developers could put into the game. So we're going to be doing those two things, and we're also going to be changing the ammo that gets shot out. So if you use the regular gun, you shoot this little yellow projectile. If we're using this weapon, then we will now shoot a bullet that is relevant for this gun. And then if we pick up this, now it doesn't destroy it, but we did pick it up once we collided with it. Now we'll have this submachine gun, which now shoots a different bullet. And you can see they use different ammo in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Okay. One other thing. So you see how the guns aren't really fitting correctly in the character's hands? We'll have an entire video on how to change that. This video is going to be pretty packed, just switching weapons and their ammo. So I figured let's separate this. We don't want it to get too long. So don't worry about that. That's known, and we're going to fix that in probably the next episode we do. But for now, let's get into it. So, right off the bat, if you have not watched the previous episode with ammo, that part will be very important in this episode. However, admittedly, you don't need it to make this weapon switching or the ammo mesh switching work. So if you would like to catch up on the ammo so you know how to do different ammo types with our different weapons, I'll go ahead and leave an iCard in the top right corner right here, and that'll help you get set up with that. Otherwise, we can continue without that, but I'll leave one other iCard if you want to start at the beginning of the series, just in case you want to learn from the ground up. So let's go into our code. Now, our code today is basically going to be our switch weapon function, as well as making a weapons list, and then telling Blueprint to switch the weapon mesh, and the switch weapon mesh will also switch the ammo mesh too. So in your default character, the character you're doing this for, start off by going ahead and making a T-array of base weapon pointers. Now, if you've been following this series, we'll already have a base weapon pointer in there that I believe is literally just called weapon. That's good, but obviously, now that we can hold more than one, whether it's 2 or 8 or 500, then we need the ability to store them. Simple enough. Now, we also need to know what weapon we're on in this array, because if we press a button and it goes to the next index in the array, that's perfectly fine. But maybe we want to be able to jump between them, and this will become a lot more apparent if we do a weapon wheel, which we will be doing a tutorial on in the future. So you might want to skip certain weapons and jump to another, or you might want to have certain weapons, but at a certain point in the story, you're like, nope, give them this index. They need to be on this weapon for this part. So for that, we're going to have an integer weapon index. You can see this. And the weapon index will be the weapon they're currently using. Okay. So once you've made these two things, just a note, once you've made the array of weapons, you can go ahead and delete the base weapon pointer that we had from the previous episodes that was just weapon. I actually just converted it into this array. But you don't need both of them. Then go ahead and make a function for, I called it switch to next primary weapon, which is kind of a loaded function name, but I was trying to think of all the cases where you could use this, and there are games where you have like a primary or two primaries, but then you do have secondaries you can switch between two. Or even if it's just one secondary, you don't want to be able to switch to your secondary by pressing the same button. Maybe you have to hold that button or something like that to get to it. So I made it specific, made it switch to next primary weapon. Then, lastly, go ahead and make this function, which this is a blueprint implementable event. Now, I've talked about these before, but what they are they're functions that we can call in code that perform logic in Blueprint. So we don't define the function's logic in the code. We define it in the Blueprint, but we can call it from the code. Basically the opposite of blueprint callable. And it takes in an integer index, which is our weapon index. Okay, so let's go into our CPP for the default character we've got. A few things I want to change here. So most of this will stay the same. I kind of talked about this in the last episode, but there's a lot going on in this constructor because they construct the VR weapon, the regular weapon, and then motion controls all for this character. That's fine. There's a few things we need to do though because there's just so much going on. So real quick, all this logic will already be in here. This isn't anything that you guys need to change. Okay, so in our constructor, you go down to the bottom where we always set our variables, and let's set our weapon index to 0. The rest is all stuff I already set from before. You can also change this if you want to set it to a specific weapon, and it's not necessarily the 0 index. For example, a fist or weapon, but you'd like to start your player out with like a pistol or something, then maybe you switch this. But this is just basically your default value for that character. Now we need a way to switch between our guns, and this will be done by a key press. So if we go into our editor, go to Edit, Project Settings. Alright, once you're in here, go into Input, and then go down and make a new action mapping. You hit the little plus right here. I called it Switch Primary, again, just in case we have stuff with secondaries that is separate. You can also just call it Switch Weapon, whatever you'd like, and make it a key. I like to keep my keys right in order, so it doesn't matter what you make this. I just know where to look because I do different tutorial series and it can be hard to keep track of all the buttons. So I made my switch primary button T. Now if I close this out and I go into my setup player input component function, there's a bunch in here. Whether you've been following the tutorial or not, this comes with the template. Just go ahead and add this new binding. All you need to do, if you're not familiar, is copy one of the other bindings if you'd like, or just start typing it out. The text in quotes here has to be the name of the input we just added, which I called switch primary. It should be on press. This is when you press the key down, and then this is the function to call once the action has been done. So we want to call the function we made earlier in this episode, switch to next primary weapon. Then scroll down and let's make our switch to next primary weapon function. So go ahead and type this out. Remember, it doesn't take any arguments or anything. And it looks like there's a lot going on here. There's not really a lot. It's the same exact thing with like one line changed in each of these. So it'll be pretty simple once you understand what's going on here. We're going to do something called a switch statement. Again, I've used switch statements before, but never quite in this context. So when you do a switch statement, it's basically an if-else statement that has a lot of different cases. Or it can have a lot of different cases. You can use it for as many or as little as you'd like. But if this value matches this case value, 0, 1, 2, then it'll do the logic within this case. So the way you write it is literally switch, parentheses, the variable that you're checking for what value it is. We're going to check for weapon index because we want to know what weapon we're on so we know what weapon to switch to. Then you literally write case, the value you're looking for. So I'm looking to see if weapon index is 0, and then a colon. Then you do the logic you want inside of it. Now, the logic, like I said, is going to be the same in all these, just changing the value that we're looking for. So no big deal here, but let's cover it. If weapons.num is greater than 1, this is saying if our weapons T array that we made in our header file, right here, if this array .num, which is how many elements are in the array, is greater than 1. So if there's more, if the character has more than one weapon, basically is all we're saying, then set the weapon index to be 1. We're going to switch from 0 to 1. If weapon index was 0, we want to go to 1. That's simple. Then I call switch weapon mesh with the weapon index in here. Remember, switch weapon mesh is the function we made that is the blueprint implementable event. Else, if weapons.num is not, so it's either less than or equal to 1, that means we only have one weapon. So weapon index is going to stay 0. We're not going to change it because we don't have a weapon to switch to. And we're still going to call switch weapon mesh weapon index. This is a case where you actually don't have to do this. You could easily take this out. I just left it in because it's literally copy and paste from the other ones. But it wasn't being lazy. I wanted to show you that you can simply remove this. Okay. Now make sure you put this break at the end. So this break is referring to case 0. What will happen if you don't put this break is it'll go through this logic, and then I'll instantly enter case 1 and start going through this logic, and then enter case 2 and start going through this logic. These breaks mean once I'm finished, once I've reached this line of the code, break out of this case, break out of the switch statement. That's the most important part. Otherwise, if it's case 1, we simply check if weapons.num is greater than 2. And if it is greater than 2, then weapon index equals 2. So this means we have more than 2 weapons. So we have 3 or more weapons. If we have 3 or more weapons, then we can switch between them. Simple enough. Otherwise, we reset the weapon index. So you'll get a pattern here. The else in all these cases is just setting the weapon index back to 0 and calling switch weapon mesh. But the other one, the other case, is literally the case number plus 1 to be what we're checking for. And then we're going to set the number we're checking for to the weapon index. See how that works? So for case 1, we check if we have more than 2 weapons. And then if we do, we set the weapon index to 2, and we're good to go. For case 2, we check if we have more than 3 weapons, and then we set the weapon index to 3. Lastly, I have this thing called default, and then just the break. So default just means if the case is none of these. So for example, if I forgot to add logic for weapon index 4, but it existed, then it would go to default, and then it would just break out and do nothing. Usually used to prevent a crash and things like that, but that's what this is for. Now before we go on, at this point we're good. Honestly, we've changed the things in code that we've needed to add, but we need to adjust a lot of the things that we have, and I mean a lot of the things that we have. Now it's not a big deal though, because we're going to find and replace them. If you're not familiar with this, this is a good tool to learn. So let me find a good example. There should be one right here in on fire. So we had all these checks for if weapon to see if weapon existed, and then we got weapon clip ammo. Well, all that's changing now because we're not using just a single weapon. We want to get the weapon from the array, which is going to require accessing the weapon array using the weapon index. So what I suggest is going in here, typing in the name of what your weapon was. So for me, before we made the weapon array, my weapons variable, what it is now, was called weapon. So I would look up weapon, and then I would hit the little down arrow here. It says toggle to switch between find and replace modes, and then you type what you want, and we can put weapons. You put this little bracket here, weapon index bracket. Then what will happen is everywhere where you had weapon, it'll put weapons weapon index. You can also check the whole word and the case options if you have other things named weapon that you don't want to screw up. For example, reload weapon here. If I were to do this, this would screw up this function and put reload weapon weapon index as the function name, which is not what we want. So be careful with this tool if you called it something similar and you have names split up. Okay? Make sure you don't screw yourself over by doing this. I wanted to teach you about that though. So you can see when I did it, I had a few things. It fixed all my issues, but I did have a few things. For example, if you named everything the same as I did, make sure, and this should probably be current document, by the way, so just be careful you don't change it everywhere. Current document will only do the file that we're on, which is what we want. The places where it'll really matter, make sure you're careful with reload weapon and e-weapon type instances. Just be careful if you find and replace. Otherwise, it's not a big deal. Go ahead and build your project, and then you'll get errors saying, hey, we can't find weapon. And then you go ahead and you click on all the errors in the output log, go to each of them, switch them over to weapon or weapons bracket weapon index. To give you a good idea of where they're all at, I can go over them all right now. If you've been following the tutorial exactly, go to on fire. The first if check we were doing after we check if world is not equal to null needs to be adjusted. The check to see if there's any ammo in the clip right below that needs to be adjusted. The subtraction of clip ammo after a successful fire needs to be adjusted, as well as the reload weapon function call right below that in the following else statement. Then, on your reload weapon, both the function call for manual reload right here, where we have if weapon, this will be if weapons weapon index. When we do reload weapon, we need to adjust weapon to weapons weapon index weapon type, like this is. In reload weapon, we need to check weapons weapon index instead of just weapon. And lastly, in calculate ammo, we need to adjust it in a lot of places, so I won't really go over it, but anywhere where you just had weapon before, make sure you use weapons weapon index now. Okay, you can see there's a lot here, and you can just copy what I have exactly if that's more comfortable for you. Pause the video there. And now the rest of it will be pretty simple. You don't have to change anything else. But I wanted to make that known. I know it's a big code change, but I didn't want to start the series off by having that. It's much easier to work with one weapon to begin with and then just change that over. So, okay. Now we're done with the code. Make sure you can build solution, and it works. If it doesn't, solve any errors and then build again. Go into Unreal and hit compile. You'll get the code changes over to the editor, and then you'll be good to go. With that, just so you know, there is one thing we have to change in the character HUD as well, following the same principles. So we were getting the ammo type by casting to the tutorial character and then getting a weapon. We now want to do it slightly differently. Everything's the same that's happening in this logic, but instead of getting weapon, you can delete the weapon node, drag off of this, search for weapons, get weapons, drag off of this array and type get, then drag off of your character again and search for weapon index, and then drag that into the get value. And we were checking if weapon was valid before using it, so do the same thing here. Just drag in this to is valid instead of the weapon. Now I'm going to delete this because you can see it right above, but you have to make sure you do that. That way you can actually have your HUD show up correct information on the screen. So this first person character, I didn't make this. This is if you're using the template, it'll look like this. So I believe it's a little hard to tell. I believe it's in starter content, blueprints. Nope, I can't quite remember. First person CPP, blueprints, yep. So this is where Unreal decided to put this. This is where Epic decided to put this when they made the tutorial, or the template, excuse me. Weird spot, but if you haven't made your own character yet, this is where it should be for you. Content, first person CPP, blueprints. This is our character where you can see our hands, you know, our arms as we're in the scene, and it also has a gun here. It also has the VR gun here. A lot of that's not important, and we can actually just minimize it like that. What we do care about is FP gun, FP underscore gun. We care about that. And we're going to care about also the ammo class. So if you go into your event graph of this first person character, now you're not going to have anything in here. This is what we're going to add. But go ahead and click on class settings. Make sure that this is an FPS tutorial character child. So make sure the parent class has FPS tutorial character. Then go into class defaults. And when you look at, I won't be able to see it anymore because I did the change. So when you hit details, it should be right under gameplay if I'm remembering correctly. So it should be right here where my weapon is. You should be able to see something that says projectile class. That's good if you see that. However, we're going to change the way that works. That's not something we wrote. That's, again, something with the template, but we're just going to change it a little bit. So let's do that before we do this logic because it'll make a lot more sense that way. So first of all, go back into your code and go into your header file. We're not going to change any logic. We're just going to change the way some things are defined. In your header file, there were a bunch of variables that already came with the class. One of them is the projectile class. So it's a T subclass of class A FPS tutorial projectile class. This is fine, but this is the U property says something like visible defaults only. Change that to blueprint read write. So visible defaults only is just basically making it so you can see the options that are there that are defaults for your game, and you can switch between them. But we want to actually be able to edit this class and set it to whatever class we want, because we want to change between all the different ammo classes we have. That's a nice little override we can use. Also, go up to FP gun, excuse me. This is also like visible defaults only or blueprint read only, something like that. Make sure you switch this to blueprint read write, because we're going to grab the gun to be able to switch the mesh on it. Technically, Unreal will let you get away with changing it right in here because you can just drag off FP gun, the inherited object, without changing that. But it'll give you a warning because it's not blueprint read write, and I figured we could get rid of that. So, okay, make sure that you build and compile again, just to be safe. Now, at this point, we just have to make an event, and in fact, we already made the event, but we need to implement the functionality for the event. So in our first-person character, start typing the function name that you had that we made as a blueprint implementable event. I'll show you one more time. So it's switch weapon mesh for me, this function right here. Now you'll actually be able to find this if you're in the character class. So event switch weapon mesh, it's right here. All right? I already have it, so if I click it, it'll bring me right here. And it's got its index like we have. What we want to do is add a switch statement. So just like we were doing in the code, but this is the blueprint version. Drag off the index and do switch, and it will say switch on int. You want to select that, and then you can click add pin to add 3 of these, because we've got 3 guns we're going to have for today. And I know they're not assault rifle, pistol, shotgun like I promised, but I was using the free FPS weapon pack in the Unreal store. I can leave a little link. I believe it was only free for a limited time, but in case you're curious about the specific weapons or ammo that I've used. Then, once you've done that, again, the logic is going to be the same between all 3 of these cases, but depending on what our weapon index is, it changes what we need to set our skeletal mesh and our projectile class to. So for one, let's go into our base weapon BP. Now, if you've been following the series, I've already made this. This isn't anything new. You should have this as well. Basically, it's a blueprint class that is a child of base weapon. And just to show you, in case you haven't been following, I believe it's in first person blueprints, first person FP weapon, here it is. Okay, so base weapon BP. All I did was hit add new, blueprint class, and look for base weapon, which is a code class we have. So I can leave an iCard if you want to set up your weapons the same way I do to the base weapon tutorial. And then I have 2 other classes. So I have base weapon BP, which has a skeletal mesh on it. Now it didn't before this. It just had a default scene root. What you need to do is go to add component, type skeletal mesh like this, and select it. It'll add this, and then you can change the mesh you want to use. SK_FP gun is the default one for the template. That's the one we want to use for the base weapon, as long as you want that as a weapon in your game still. You don't have to change anything else with it. You can keep everything else the same. Although, if you're trying to have this as a pickup item, like you see in the world, it kind of looks like this is a pickup item, then you should make this overlap all, and then we'll destroy it once we overlap, and make sure you generate overlap events. But it's not necessary. In this case, I'm not doing it because I'm just giving our character the weapon right away off the start. But thinking down the line, that'll be useful. We'll do weapon pickups and stuff later, so don't worry too much about that. The assault rifle BP is the same thing. So it's literally, if I look at my class settings, I go off base weapon as well. Not necessarily base weapon BP, just base weapon. So the same way I made base weapon BP, I make assault rifle BP. The reason I've done this is because I might want to change and have an assault rifle code class because of the way it shoots. I might want to change something up, you know what I mean? And maybe I have to hold the button instead of single fire and things like that. So I left it open for me. If you have an assault rifle class already, you can use it, but it's not necessary. And then same deal. Go into your skeletal mesh, select the skeletal mesh you want, put these to overlap all, and generate overlap events. And then lastly, submachine gun BP is the same thing, where I have a skeletal mesh, I've set my skeletal mesh, and I've generate overlap events and set it to overlap all. Now the only thing different with this is I don't start the character out with this gun, so I do have some logic to add it. Now, remember I said I wasn't destroying these earlier? There is a reason for that. So we're not actually spawning these in the scene at any point. We're actually using an object reference and putting on our character, which is actually a very bad way to do it. It was just simple at the time. So also in the next episode when we go over weapon pickups, I will be changing that system a bit to make it so it actually gets added to your inventory and we spawn a unique instance for ourselves. But right now, if you remember, on your character itself, the way we were actually setting the weapon we had was we had something called weapon, which we were using to add this to our character. And that was working fine. As long as you had it in the scene, you could select it. See, I have these 3 guns in the scene and I can select them because it's looking for a weapon, a base weapon class instance. But right now, if you go ahead and go to this section, so just go to your character in the world, in the details search right here, component search, what is this one called? This one, yeah, details. Search weapons and find your array that we made in code. Then you can go ahead and add as many elements as you want. So I'm starting here with 2 weapons. I could only start them with 1. I could start them with 3. Doesn't matter. And then set your weapons. Make sure, again, if you can't find them, you have to drag them into the scene like this. And now I have another one. I'm going to delete that one because I don't want duplicates in the scene. But I'm just showing you. So he's got a base weapon and an assault rifle to begin with. Okay, so you'll see if I switch weapons and I switch again, he goes back to the base weapon. If I collide with the submachine gun, then I can go to the submachine gun. So there you go. The way we make that happen is if we go to our submachine gun BP, and since we set the events to overlap, all we have to do is grab the actor begin overlap, which you can literally search for by doing event actor begin overlap right here. Then it has an other actor as a return node. Just go ahead and drag off that and cast it to see if it's us that's colliding with it, FPS tutorial character. If it is, we grab the weapons array from it, and then we do something called add unique. You could do add, but add unique means there can only be one of that instance, so you can't pick it up multiple times, which is good. And then you just drag in self. So you can drag off the blue node and type self. There you go. And of course drag your code through. And I've set up destroy actor because we'll be using it in the next episode, but because we need the references to still be active, otherwise we'll lose access to our gun, I went ahead and just left this disconnected here. But what this is doing is adding this to our character's weapon array. So when we collide with it, we then have access to this. And you can actually see this. If I click on my first person character and open this up. So you can see if I go to weapons, weapons, you can see I have 2 here, right? If I collide with the submachine gun, you can see I have a 3rd element in that array that's the submachine gun BP. Alright, now the last thing we need to do, since we have our placeable weapons in the scene, is determine what happens when we switch to those weapons. So we can go back here, now that we've made the weapons in the scene and we know exactly when we want to use them. I was saying before we were setting our skeletal mesh here, and we're also setting our ammo class here. So let me go ahead and close out my weapon BPs, because we don't need them anymore. Now, if we're weapon index 0, we know weapon index 0 in our weapon array is the base weapon. So, that's skeleton FP gun. All you gotta do is drag in the FP gun, which I've said you can do, and then go ahead and type set skeletal mesh. And this will change what the weapon looks like. And you can put any weapon you have in here. These are all from the FPS template download from the Unreal store, from the Epic Marketplace. So for the first one, if we're weapon index 0, I've chosen SK_FP gun. That's the default Unreal weapon. If it's weapon index 1, we have that assault rifle. So I've chosen SK_AR4. And if it's weapon index 2, then I've chosen SK_SMG11_Y, which is that submachine gun that we had. I don't know what the I don't know why that was unchecked, but it won't hurt it either way, just for the record. There you go. The other thing we want to do is set our projectile class. This is the change we made to make sure that projectile class was blueprint read-write. So the way we do that is we had a default ammo class as well, which I actually did not open, and I should. I keep going to the wrong folder because the way Unreal sets it up is a bit weird. So if I go into these, you can see the class defaults for these guys. So I made two types of ammo. There's already one that starts called a first-person projectile. Okay, so if we search for first-person projectile, right here, this blueprint class. Now, this already exists. It's got projectile movement on it to, work like a bullet, and it's got a mesh on it that we can change out to be whatever we want. So we can go ahead and use this class as our parent for all of our other ammo classes. Of course, there will be weapons that are different, but you can always change the projectile movement to make it act that way. Faster or slower projectiles. You can even spawn more projectiles, things like that. So if we close this, go ahead and make two new classes, and I'm going to get rid of this so I can actually find it. I believe it's in first person, weapon, ammo. Here we go. So I've went ahead and I've added a new class. And I've used first person projectile as the parent class for both of them. One assault rifle ammo BP, one submachine gun ammo, which should be BP. There we go. Now if I go into both of them, this is them. You can keep everything the same in terms of projectile movement and such. Just change the static mesh to whatever you want the bullet or object to look like. And make sure, if you actually do this, that you change the scale. It's set to a scale of 0.1 because the parent class had their static mesh set like that. Very frequently will this be way too small, especially if you're using a bullet. You probably will literally not be able to see it. I mean, this is 3 times as large and it's still pretty small, but then again, bullets are pretty small, so it makes sense. We don't do anything in the event graph. You can keep everything the same. You might have to rotate your ammo as well, just for the record. It might come out the wrong direction. And then same with submachine gun ammo. It's also just a child of the first person projectile. I've changed the static mesh to this bullet. The ammo doesn't match up with the weapon. This is actually like a grenade launcher shell. But I just applied different ammo for it. Random meshes that I found first. There we go. Now we have our ammo classes and we have our weapons. All we need to do is set our projectile class and we will be golden. So now that we made blueprint, this projectile class blueprint read write, you can simply search for set projectile class and it'll show up. It would not show up before if you didn't make a blueprint read write. And then when you hit the drop down, it'll give you the only options that are available that are of that class type. So you have the FPS tutorial projectile and first person projectile, which are the defaults. First person projectile is the yellow mesh that we use for the first gun. So if we're switching to the first gun, we want that. And then if we're switching to the assault rifle, we want the assault rifle ammo class. Lastly, if we're switching to the submachine gun, we want the submachine gun ammo class. And that's it, guys. If you follow that tutorial, you'll be able to run around, deal some damage to your enemies, switch weapons. You can see it's actually switching the ammo type as well. So see how I'm shooting this and my ammo is going down? But then I switch weapons and I have more ammo for this and less ammo for this. And if I even switch to this, then I have less ammo. That's because these weapons that I have in here are actually, they're defined as different weapon types. The assault rifle BP is defined as an assault rifle. My base weapon BP is defined as a pistol, and my submachine gun BP is actually defined as a shotgun. So they're using the respective ammo types that we set up in the previous episode. Anyway guys, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. If this video helped you, please subscribe. It does more for me and more for the channel than anything else you can do. Just lets me know that I'm doing a good job teaching you guys what you want to learn, and just shows me that you're supporting the series. If you had any issues with this episode or any episode in the series, then please feel free to reach out to me on Discord. You can feel free to join the community. I can't leave an iCard because YouTube doesn't like it, but you can look in the description down below and find out where to join. If you want to come support us on Twitch, twitch.tv/Shawnthebro27. We've recently been playing through Dark Souls 2, Scholar of the First Sin, and Resident Evil 7. We're about to finish out in Madhouse. Very, very fun, very lengthy experience, so feel free to come check it out. Lastly, guys, if you'd like to come support us on Patreon, it's fully set up now and working. I know a few people brought it up to me, so thank you for the idea. I appreciate it. But just wanted to show you, nothing that is on Patreon is going to be taking away from anything you guys already have, but giving support on there will get you access to more benefits down the line. Alright guys, thanks again so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, my friends.